In this video, I'm going to teach you how to sing the gospel at Mass. Some other time, in some other video, I'd also welcome an opportunity to show you how to sing all the different tones at Mass for the first reading, second reading, etc. In particular, because with the prophecy tone, so many people don't know how to sing the prophecy tone in English. The thing is that there are actually these beautiful flexes for monosyllables. I've seen entire books published which are ignorant of these. I've seen methods published which are ignorant of these. And for example, in the prophecy, which I know we're not going to talk about today, but you have these things, and concealed me in the shadow of his arm, etc. So sometime I will explain those other tones. But today, we're just going to talk about the gospel. Now, do you see the web link at the top of this little thing in purple? www.ccwatershed.org/sing the gospel. If you go there, it should lead you to the website, and you should see two files listed on the website. And these are very important. One is a demonstration file, and one has the rules. So you're gonna wanna open up both those files during this presentation. So first of all, singing the gospel, you have to realize and understand that there are 3 different tones for singing the gospel. And you can decide whichever tone you want to use. Today I'm going to teach you how to do what I consider the most beautiful tone, possibly the most beautiful tone ever conceived of in the history of mankind, which is usually listed as the 3rd tone, which is sometimes called the more ancient tone. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, the first thing is you can look for any questions during your gospel, and because you can just get those out of the way at the very beginning. You can just get them out of the way, okay? So, for instance, here's a question here. What then will this child be? That's a question, right? As a matter of fact, I didn't treat it as a question because it's kind of combined with another sentence. All who heard these things took them to heart, saying, what then will this child be? I suppose I could have treated it as a question, and that would have been fine. I just didn't. Let's look for and see if we can find another question. There's another question here, and again, I didn't treat it as a question because perhaps it was so short, and it's combined with another sentence, really. So let me see here. I think there's a question. Here you go. Here's a question. Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer? So you find questions that you want to treat as questions that I would say are long enough to treat as a question. And you can instantly get those out of the way by marking them. Because the question just goes like this. Your daughter has died, why trouble the teacher any longer? Now that one is not that easy to apply the tone to. And again, going to the website, you can look at the tone and you can see how it's applied in Latin, and you can see how it's applied in English. That one didn't sound all that great. This one sounds better. Who has touched my clothes? So, see the question, who has touched my clothes? Who has touched my clothes? That one sounds fine according to the tone. Again, you have to do the best you can with the tone as it's given. And sometimes they sound fantastic, and sometimes they don't sound all that great. Let's look at this question, see what I did with this. The question is, why this commotion and weeping? Why this commotion and weeping? So, those are the questions. You get them out of the way first, okay? Now that we've talked about the questions and those are done, we don't need to talk about those anymore. I would actually start at the very end, and here's the reason why I say that. Because let's say you're doing this gospel here, this is coming up this Sunday. It's the gospel for the Feast of Corpus Christi. the first thing is you have to go to the end and make sure that you have that all picked out in terms of how long the sentences are. And how the monosyllables and stuff line up. So this one, you could probably grab the end here, and it has two nice long sections. So again, referring to your sheet that talks about the ending. Well, actually, before I even mark this one out, let's see what I did in this other file that's on the website. See the ending here, let's go into the ending. He gave strict orders. It goes like this. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. That's the ending. And it's beautiful, and you don't want to goof it up by having it like super short or something that doesn't fit well. So you can look at the ending and make sure how you're going to break it up. And you probably noticed that when I sang the notes on the word no, that I stressed the bottom. And that's just the tradition that I learned to do when I'm singing the ending of the tone. I know Toscanini said tradition is the last bad performance, but I just always learned to do it that way. So, again, the ending of this gospel is, He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. So that one works nicely, except she should is kind of a tongue twister. But anyway, let's look up here and see if we have another example of that tone of the gospel. Here we go. So let's see how this one ends. The child grew and became strong in spirit, and he was in the desert until the day of his manifestation to Israel. So again, this one doesn't break up as well. I mean, I suppose I could have done, the child grew and became strong in spirit. But then the ending would have gone on forever. And he was in the desert until the day of his manifestation to Israel. I suppose that would have been fine. I suppose I could have done it that way. So anyway, you figure out the ending. And the same thing over here with this one that we were already talking about. And when the leftover fragments were picked up, they filled 12 wicker baskets. And that one's not going to, it's fine. It's not going to be that easy though, because picked up is kind of a funky thing in terms of you have to figure out, which accents. I mean, it's just not a normal phrase. We're picked up. Both of those were picked up. Actually, all three of those. Are accented words, and you have to figure out which one you want. I don't know if you would go, and when the leftover fragments were picked up. I mean, again, you look at the tone that I provided on the website, and you think up what makes the most sense to you. And we're going to talk about that in a second, by the way. But that's what it's all about. You say, what works best, for the English language? I suppose, as I just showed a second ago, I would just do, and when the leftover fragments were picked up, they filled 12 wicker baskets. Baskets doesn't present a problem, by the way. So, like I say, you get your questions out of the way, and a lot of the Gospels don't even have any questions, unfortunately, because questions, of course, are beautiful in the tone. But you get those out of the way, and then you get your ending out of the way. Okay, so when those two things are done, then all you have to do is break up things into, you figure out if there's any middles and if there's any endings. So we have middles and endings. And before we talk about those, let me just sing through one of these gospel really quick. And then we'll talk about our middles and our endings, okay? The Lord be with you and with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. By the way, that's the beginning of the Gospel. It goes over that in the tones, and I'm not going to go over that because it's always the same, because the gospel always begins the same way. Glory to you, O Lord. Now the actual tone starts, okay? When the time arrived for Elizabeth to have her child, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy toward her, and they rejoiced with her. Okay, now I'm going to stop. Those two were evenly broken up. You have your middles and your ends. In other words, the middle is the part that goes, Elizabeth to have her child. And as you'll see when you look at the tone, how it's actually applied, you have two accents. I don't know if I have a way to show you this by pointing to it. I don't know if you can see it or not, but have and child works fine because those are your two accents. It gets trickier in some of the sentences, but so that's a middle, and then you have your ending. You just end on the last accented syllable. Now, let's think about what that means, by the way. Then we have another middle, for example, and then we have another ending, rejoiced with her. Now, let's think about what that means, because some people mistakenly might go, and they rejoiced with her, because they say that's the last accent. You know, her is an accented word. But if you actually say the actual sentence, her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy toward her, and they rejoiced with her. You'll see that you don't say, and they rejoiced with her. I mean, that just sounds goofy. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy toward her, and they rejoiced with her. That just doesn't make sense. And they rejoiced with her is how you say it, and so that's how you sing it. Her neighbors and relatives heard. By the way, did you see that I put a little pause there so that I didn't have to run it all together? Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy toward her, and they rejoiced with her. Okay, so let's go on. I'm going to zoom out a second here. Let's go see what else this has in store for us and how I wrote it out, because other people might write it out differently. Let's see how I did it. When they came on the 8th day to circumcise the child, they were going to call him Zechariah after his father. Now that's a tricky one, because again, to get those two accents in, to try to honor those is difficult. After his father, it's obviously accented on after and father, so I stretched out just a little bit. I put his, fa on the same note. And again, you can look at the tone and you can decide how many is reasonable and rational to do, because English is not the same as Latin. As a matter of fact, we have words in English that they don't have in Latin that have, for example, an accented syllable followed by 3 unaccented syllables. They don't have that in Latin, but we do in English. An example would be tabernacle or covetousness. Covetousness, tabernacle. They don't have words in Latin that have 1 accent followed by 3 unaccented syllables. So you just have to do the best you can with it and apply it how you think it should be applied to English. I just went, they were going to call him Zechariah after his father. And I think that works. But his mother said in reply, no, he will be called John. So then there's the ending. Remember how I said you got your middles and your endings? That's all you need, middles and endings. Actually, sometimes you don't have a middle. You just use an ending because it's not long enough to have a middle. And that's why you look at these in advance, okay? By the way, I put a small pause after no, which I think is appropriate. Some people think that you should chant the readings exactly as you would read them. It turns out that's not actually the case. That's a whole nother story. But basically, just because you would read something a certain way doesn't mean you automatically chant it that way. And what happens in that case, of course, it's pretty close when you do things like Gospels and epistles. That's fairly close to the way that you would read it. Not exactly the same, of course, because we're singing and not speaking. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. But the big problem is when they start singing psalms and other things like that, and they pause on every, comma and everything, and it just sounds ridiculous. And that's not chanting. That's not what the whole point of chanting is, to elevate it to a different level. So just be cautious of that it shouldn't be this ridiculous thing where you pause at every single comma and everything. But here, I think it makes sense, even when you're chanting it, to say, but his mother said in reply, no, he will be called John. I think that makes sense. But, I mean, I also wouldn't have an issue if someone said, But his mother said in reply, "No, he will be called John." And again, because this is a heightened form, it's singing it. We're not just speaking it. If the game were all about the mere fact of letting people understand what we're saying, which it's not, but if it were, then you would simply read it. You wouldn't sing it. Okay, that's the whole point. But again, in that instance, I think it's fine to pause there as you would if you were reading it. Okay. So then it goes on again. Oh, look, here's one where I didn't add a middle because it would have been excessive. It would have been excessive to add a middle stop. But they answered her, "There is no one among your relatives who has this name." So I made the judgment that it would have been excessive to add a middle in there. It's just not long enough. Let's see what else I do. So they made signs asking his father what he wished him to be called. I added a middle. He asked for a tablet and wrote, "John is his name," and all were amazed. So there's your ending, okay? And it goes on pretty much as normal, okay? And again, you do the same thing if you're marking out the gospel for this Sunday. You'd mark it out. You'd think to yourself, okay, where do we want to have middles? Where do we want to have endings? That's the big thing, you know? And it's, again, if you have extremely short sentences and extremely long sentences, it becomes very difficult to always know where to have middles and endings. So that's what it's all about. Let's see. There's a very long gospel at the end of this example file. See, look at how long it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. And by the way, I wrote these out for you so that you can know, what I did. Of course, you're not going to write out every chant, because you just have to memorize the endings and mark them in the book. It would take forever for you to write out every chant, according to notation. But again, it's all about looking at the text and seeing where your ending is, your beginning, and then you have your middles and ends during the actual reading of it. The major thing is to watch out for prepositional phrase, because look at for example, I'm going to zoom in here. Oh, let me see if I think I can make it view for you easier to see it here. Now here's an example where "who touched me" is technically a question, but the way that the sentence is, I felt it was better not to make that a question phrase. But I suppose, again, you can look at the tone and decide yourself what you want to do. So what I did was, I started here. But his disciples said to Jesus, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" Again, that's an example where you have to look at what the actual last accented syllable in the sentence is. You wouldn't sing it, "And yet you ask, 'Who touched me?' Because you wouldn't. That's just not the last accented syllable of a sentence. You don't say, "Who touched me?" You say, "Who touched me?" That's how you say it. You say, "Who touched me?" So touched is really the last accented syllable. And that's what you always have to watch out for. Just as the same as, here, for example, the woman realizing what had happened to her. See, I didn't add a middle. I thought that would be excessive. I just go right to the ending. Oh, no. Hold on a second. I combine a middle here. Look what I did here. I start up here. "And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling." See, it's always the last accent. You wouldn't say, "approached in fear and trembling." No, it's always the last accented word. Same thing with affliction here. I don't know. I guess the only example I really have, I think off the top of my head, is the one I already showed you earlier. And we can go back upon him. Here we go. Here's a typical example here. Okay. At the point of death, right? So in that case, death is the actual last accent. "My daughter is at the point of death." But watch this one. You have a prepositional phrase over here, upon him. Please come lay your hands on her, that she may get well and... that she may get well and live. That's a tricky one. That she may get well and live. He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. See, that's a typical example of watching out for prepositional phrases. And a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. You don't read it, you wouldn't say, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. That's just not the way you read it. And a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. That's how you read it. So that's also how you notate it there. So that's all I can basically tell you. You follow the tones that I've already provided, and you find out, of course, the ending first, and then you have the beginning, of course, and then you mark your questions, and then you just see what other sentences you can divide. So finally, I'll look at this one for this Sunday, and let's see if we can do this. Let's see here. So I already start dividing my big. I'm just doing this on the fly. You might do a better job yourself, but you just try to go through and divide. What makes sense. If you didn't want to, remember how I mentioned to you that picked up causes problems? It sounds weird. You could actually take the ending here and go end it like this. They all ate and were satisfied. And when the leftover fragments were picked up, they filled 12 wicker baskets. So let's mark it that way. Okay, so there's our ending. So that's done. You can mark that however you like. Okay, so that's done. Okay. And then the rest of it, let's see here. Sometimes it helps to go from the back. Okay, then taking 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven. Well, the ending is obvious, of course, and gave them to the disciples who sat before the crowd. That's obvious, of course. So we'd use our ending there. But how do we want to divide this whole thing here? So you could actually, if you were having problems, you could cut that sentence out, and you could just do this. You could let's see how it works to have a middle here and an ending there. Of course, I can't type. Let's see how that would work. That's going to work nice, I think. Then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing over them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. That works really nicely. That works extremely nicely. Right? I mean, it's just perfect there. So that one's how we're going to do that one. Okay? Now let's back up a little bit. This one could be a set itself. Look, see, you could do the ending here like this. You could do the middle here like this, okay? So you could go, then he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of in groups of about 50. So this one presents a little bit of a problem in the sense of have them sit down in groups of about 50. Doesn't really correspond with the tone nicely in English. As you've probably downloaded, as I told you to the actual tone from the website in Latin and English. There isn't really a good way of fitting that in. So, I mean, you could do, numerous things, I suppose. You could go, have them sit down in groups of about 50, which breaks, the rules. Or you could do, have them sit down in groups of about 50, which also breaks the rule. It's just a difficult question, and so you could look at that, and you could apply it, you could break the rules if you want, or you could go, you know what? I'm going to make the middle here. Now the men there numbered about 5,000. Then he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50. They did so and made them all sit down. Which again, it's all in how you break it up and what you decide is the most important. You know, in terms of text-wise, in terms of having equal amounts of text, that's actually a pretty nice solution. You know, again, you could say, well, it's not normal. You know, I mean, you could do different things if you wanted to. You could say, you could break it there, and have that be its own thing. Then he said to his disciples, etc., and not include that first one in there, and then you could group it up here. Or you could have it be by itself. You could just not have a middle. You could just go, now the men there numbered about 5,000. You know? So it's all in what you like to do. Let's, for the sake of argument, let's see here. Let's see what this is up here. I mean, you could make this a middle here, as long as it doesn't have too awkward of a thing. Yeah, that's good. For all these people, you could make this one the ending here. See? That'll work nicely. I'll show you in a second. It'll work nicely. And then this one, let's see what we can do here. Let's see if we did an ending here. And let's say if we did a middle here. Let's see here. Actually, let's do the middle here. Let's count this here. Let's do the middle here. And the ending here. I think that'll work. Okay? So then we're all the way to the beginning. So we're going to have a big, you know, you wouldn't like to normally end the, end the sentence with the 12 approached him and said, except for the fact that you're going to have a huge quotation here. You see? So that quotation, the fact that it's a quotation, justifies ending the sentence in effect, even though it's not a technical quote-unquote period. And of course we know that the period, what we call a period and a comma in the year 2013, is not what they would have called a period and a comma in the year 36 AD. You know, so basically, let's just see how this goes, okay? So you'd start out, I can't remember at the moment which gospel it is. For the Corpus Christi year C, I can't remember which gospel it is, but let's just use one of the ones they give you here in the example, which I've already told you several times you need to download. Let's just sing through it and see if I can do it. Let's see if I can do it without even practicing it, okay? The Lord be with you, and with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. And as you can see, it doesn't matter who it is. They're all listed there. I wouldn't do it the way he suggests, by the way. I would do according to Mark, or according to Luke, or according to John. This is Jurgens, how he applies the rules in the Liber to English. You can do what you like. Oh, I see. He even says right here that my way is fine as well. Okay? In any event, whoever wrote this particular gospel, I can't remember, but let's just go on. Let's just say that it was the gospel of John. According to John. Let's see if this works. Jesus spoke to the crowds about the kingdom of God, and he healed those who needed to be cured. As the day was drawing to a close, the 12 approached him and said... Again, that's kind of odd to end in the middle of a sentence, but it's justified by the fact that we have a large quotation coming up. Dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the surrounding villages and farms and find lodging and provisions, for we are in a deserted place here. He said to them, give them some food yourselves. Okay, so that obviously doesn't work. That's distorting the meaning of the text. So we need to change that. Okay? We need to change that. The question is, let's have that one be the beginning. Jesus spoke to the crowds about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed to be cured. You could have an ending there if you want. I suppose you could stick a middle here if you really wanted to. About the kingdom of God. If you wanted to, you could. And he healed those who needed to be cured. I'm going to put a question mark here. Now, what do we do about this? And as the day was drawing to a close, the 12 approached him and said, let's put a middle there. Approached him and said, that works nicely. Dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the surrounding villages and farms and find lodging and provisions, for we are in a deserted place here. So that's our ending. Notice that it goes, we are in a deserted place here. It doesn't go, for we are in a deserted place here. Because, again, the final accent of the syllable is place. If you're reading it, you say, for we are in a deserted place here. For we're in a deserted place here. That's how you'd read it. You wouldn't say, for we are in a deserted place here. You wouldn't do that. So that ends with, we are in a deserted place here. Because it's the last accent of there. Now, this is more than I like to have. It's just more than I like to have. It's just a lot of being on the same pitch. It's allowed and it's fine, and I don't know what else you would do, so you have to do it, but it's not my favorite thing to do, okay? So let's do the whole entire thing, and I think we should be done, okay? So you open up your PDF like I told you to, and you do it like it says here. The Lord be with you, and with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel, according to whomever. Jesus spoke to the crowds about the kingdom of God, and he healed those who needed to be cured. As the day was drawing to a close, the 12 approached him and said, dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the surrounding villages and farms and find lodging and provisions, for we are in a deserted place here. He said to them, give them some food yourselves. Excuse me. They replied, 5 loaves and 2 fish are all we have, unless we ourselves go and buy food for all these people. Now the men there numbered about 5,000. Then he said to his Then he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50. They did so and made them all sit down. Then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing over them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. Here's our ending. They all ate and were satisfied, and when the leftover fragments were picked up, they filled 12 wicker baskets. So, there you go. You look at your sentences, you try to break them up as best you can with respect to accents and how it fits the tone and where the quotations are and where the questions are and everything. And you do the best you can with it. And it's beautiful. And whenever you do, when you're finally done marking it and you've practiced it, don't second guess yourself after you've already decided the best decisions. Just go with it and make it beautiful and continue to praise God in this beautiful way.